Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we're going to explore the 1970s and examine the lessons that there may be in there reflecting on that decade so long ago. With me is Joanna Harcourt-Smith, who is the host of the Future Primitive podcast and is also author of a fascinating book called Tripping the Bardo with Timothy Leary. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's an honor to be with you again.
Well, it's a pleasure for me to be with you. Somebody who I was first in the radio studio with back in the mid-1970s. So we go back a long way, back to that fascinating decade. Now, I can tell you for myself, I spent the entire decade of the 1970s in graduate school. So I was sort of cloistered, but I was cloistered at Berkeley, which is a great place to be cloistered. You were traveling all over the world in the 1970s, and I know your life changed very dramatically in that decade.
So, we continue. You and I had a conversation a couple of months ago where I spoke about meeting Timothy Leary in Switzerland.
Yes. When
he was a fugitive from prison. And then, boom, I was brought back to the States.
After flying to Afghanistan.
After flying to Afghanistan with Timothy, where we were going to be very well received by the king, etc. And then we were going to go on to what was then called Ceylon, and we would be in love poets on the beach.
More than that, you had actually formulated a plan to help Timothy Leary escape from Switzerland, where he was more or less under the captivity or control of a gangster who you knew.
Yes.
And your plan was to free him.
Well, my plan, his dream, in his time as a fugitive, after his wife went her own way, his wife who escaped with him, his wife left him, and he had dreamt that a woman would come and helped him.
He more or less imagined that he had conjured you up.
Yes, he did.
To free him.
He did. And some people think that that's very sexist because I did not come out of his hip, like it says in some creation stories. Yeah. I was a wild one before I met him. But in any case, there we were. We went to Afghanistan and we were going to, as he said, go to Ceylon and be poets on the beach and never be captured and just write poetry and have babies on the beach. But that's not what happened.
Well, but in a way that almost epitomizes the 1970s. It's like many people of our generation had a fantasy of a kind of utopia, that we didn't have to live in this crass world with the Vietnam War and global politics and all sorts of social oppression, that we could somehow escape into communes and utopian living arrangements, and that the world could be very, very different and very, very positive for us. And I think for many people, we had to come to terms with our own delusions.
I want to ask you right here, what delusions did you mostly have to come to terms with?
Well, I can tell you that,
yes,
as a matter of fact. Yeah, because I spent, as I mentioned, a decade in graduate school studying parapsychology, unique doctoral program through the individual interdisciplinary doctoral program. And I thought that I was not just a pioneer, but that I was riding a wave, because there was huge interest in parapsychology, and you must have experienced it yourself with Timothy Leary. I mean, people taking psychedelic drugs, opening up to altered states of consciousness. Many people felt that they were having telepathic experiences because of the drugs. I think a lot of that was a delusion. Although drugs do seem to have a mild effect, and maybe more of a profound effect in terms of psychic opening for some people in some circumstances. But in any case, I expected that the whole world was going to be revolutionized by the realization that human beings have the capacity for psychic functioning, and all we had to do was recognize it and provide a little bit of training, and pretty soon we'd be living in a world where everybody was psychic. That was my delusion. And I still hold to that belief, but I realize it's going to take a lot longer than I imagined.
You know, that opens up a channel for me. It's very interesting, because when I was a child and I was not treated with the love that a child should receive so that they can blossom.
You grew up in a family of jet setters, surrounded by wealth, and didn't have to do a lot to take care of yourself. But at the same time, I get the impression from reading your autobiography that people treated each other in a calculating way rather than a loving way in that environment.
Thank you. That's well explained. Now, since the advent of the current president of the United States, I've really got it down. I mean, somebody mentioned sadistic narcissism the other day. Yeah. And I know a lot about that, because in order to stay in the 0.1%, your compassion has to be killed in childhood. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise you'd give it away, especially inherited money. Mm-hmm. So by the time you are ready to be in control of whatever acquisitions come with being a part of the owning class, you have to have forgotten what compassion is. You see, because otherwise the order of things would not exist the way it is. Mm-hmm. So if you forget compassion, how can you connect with other people? How can your heart open? How can you be in a state of intimacy with others? You can't. You're taught to be in a state of absolute narcissism.
Well, you've raised a fascinating point, because what you're saying, if I hear you correctly, is that people who are born into the wealthy class, and these are people who have the ability to exert enormous political influence, are, generally speaking, not motivated to participate in the kind of politics which is like a democratic socialist kind of politics, where money is taken from the taxes of people and used for social programs.
People in the milieu that I was born in do not pay taxes. Most of them. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking to you about, and this has nothing to do with woo-woo, Illuminati, blah, blah, blah. The people who are the maybe 300, maybe 3,000 people who run things do not pay taxes.
Well,
the entitlement is way beyond that.
Now, so we're talking about something that hasn't really changed substantially since the 1970s. Many things have changed and many things have stayed the same. And I suppose now with the benefit of many decades and hindsight, I mean, the 1970s ended over 30 years ago, almost 40 years ago now. It's interesting to look back and notice some things that don't change.
I think that, well, this hasn't changed since the Middle Ages and maybe before.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting to look at that because in a way, for kind people, for compassionate people. Now, the reason I say this about compassion, I think all children are born compassionate. All of them. So this ability has to be killed. And it is killed through abuse, through mistrust, through physical abuse, but mostly through emotional abuse.
And you suffered a great deal of that, which is in your biography, your autobiography.
But I mean, this subject fascinates me because I want to go back to your saying this hasn't changed in view of the present situation. This hasn't changed since the 70s. Yeah. And back to what you were saying, I think that people are so, I have a Rousseauan idea. People come into the world as good people, so they cannot imagine that the owning class could be so cold towards the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So this is why perhaps, I mean, in my idea, people thought that the present president of the United States would care about them. But it's not, because caring is killed in the owning, inheriting class.
Well, of course, one assumes that they contribute a great deal to charity. They're always engaged in charitable functions of one kind or another. I guess you're suggesting that's just window dressing.
It's window dressing, and it's the ballet, it's the opera. Let's go on and on. There are, of course, very, very kind, wonderful, philanthropic, extremely wealthy people.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's the norm, because you don't want to give too much away.
Yeah. Well, let me come back to the issue of psychic functioning, because there's a paradox here. On the one hand, when you drive compassion out of a young child, you're closing down their psychic abilities, their psychic functioning, because the ability to feel the pain of other people, to me, that's almost a prerequisite for opening up your extrasensory perception. If you don't want to feel other people's pain, you close it down. But on the other hand, when you're being emotionally abused and physically abused, that ironically tends to open people up to psychic functioning, because the physical world is dangerous. It's a threatening place, and young children will often find ways to go deep within themselves into I'm going to call it a psychic world, a world of you could say their imagination, but then you go beyond your own imagination into an imaginal realm, but it's a realm that philosophically would say it's ontologically real. It's a real realm. One could say the astral plane, and that opens people up. So you're kind of caught in a vice, being closed down and then forced to open up at the same time.
Now we've come to a fascinating paradox, Jeffrey Mishlove.
Yes,
absolutely. I mean, like a while back, many years back, a man wrote a book called Communion.
Yes. Whitley Strieber.
Yeah, Whitley Strieber. And
I'm hoping that he's going to be visiting me soon. I've been in touch with him,
So to me, he's a perfect example. I don't really know his childhood, but to me, he's a perfect example of somebody who slipped through that crack.
Yes.
Who was able to join both, to be open to the extraordinary, or what we call, and at the same time have, I think, abuse and feelings shut down, who was able to recombine feelings with the extraordinary.
Well, for benefit of our viewers who don't know Whitley Strieber's work, Communion is about what we could call extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional contact. And it's not always pleasant. There's a whole realm, I think thousands of individuals who believe that they're sometimes contacted, sometimes abducted, and not necessarily even in the physical body, although that's occasionally reported, but in their dreams. Like somebody comes and abducts them in their dreams repeatedly and even conducts, one could say sometimes painful experiments on them. There are people who believe they've been impregnated and had their babies taken away from them by these extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings.
So this is a touchy subject.
Yes, it is.
How did I come to love? How did I become reopened to compassion? Through extreme suffering.
Yeah.
So here again, it's an incredible paradox because I'll just say it like this: we shouldn't suffer. This should be a place of pleasure and beauty.
Well, I think looking back on it over, you and I have both lived long enough that we can look back now over many decades. It seems as if we have to come to terms with the fact that, yes, this is a beautiful world in many regards, but in many regards it's hideous.
So what about this, the fact that suffering may reopen us to, you've mentioned that to me, to oneness.
Well,
which I was going to say, what I realized since the 70s and psychedelic drugs have helped me to do that, is the oneness.
There have been studies of people who report spontaneous psychic experiences of a subjective nature, and there's a very high percentage of such people who have had abusive experiences in their childhood. But that's not the only way. I, for example, had a happy childhood in a middle-class family. I felt loved. I never questioned for 1 minute the fact that I was loved as a child. And I've had psychic experiences all my adult life. I don't remember having had them as a child. But by the time I turned 21, I was experiencing a regular pattern of synchronicities and precognitive dreams. So it's not necessary that you should have a childhood filled with abuse. I think probably in my case, it had something to do with genetics, because there are family members who have, on both sides of my family, who reported having experiences of this kind. So maybe there's a genetic component.
Do you have Russian shamans in your ancestry?
I don't know about shamans, but I do have Russian ancestors who were very passionate people, and I've reported on this in one of my In Presence monologues, how my great uncle Harry, a man I didn't know very well, he just seemed like a pious old man who ran a little grocery store when I was a child. But he came to me in a powerful dream after he died. And I was in my early 20s, and I subsequently learned that he was really a mystic. I was given a book. They said, this is Uncle Harry's favorite book. It's for you, because I asked for an object and I'd had the dream. And it turned out to be a book of mystical teachings, the tales of the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the Hasidic Jewish mystical tradition. I didn't know that about my Uncle Harry while he was alive, but so we had mystics in the family.
Right. It's interesting because the other day I was thinking about my mother, how my mother had the Russian lady who read cards, how she would come at least once a week to the house, and they would both pore over these cards and try to figure out what the coming weeks and months would bring. And it was almost a ritual.
Do you think your mother gained real benefit from it?
I don't know. I was thinking about it just a week ago. To come back to what you were saying about the 70s, and you being at Berkeley and getting a doctorate, and I started talking about childhood, and so to tie it back. So my greatest desire when I was a child is that the adults' lives, what they were really thinking, would be projected on the walls. Because what I found, well, the hardest thing I found to be with was that they were lying. I could tell that they were not telling what was actually in their minds. And I kept thinking, it would be so much easier if everybody's mind was just projected.
So at a very early age, you were able to realize that you were being lied to.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I could see that what was going on behind the skin and the bone, so to speak, was not what was being spoken.
Yeah.
And I felt that was the biggest problem around. Was my big surprise when I took LSD. Like you said, I really believe, and I still believe at times when I do the medicine, that I can see behind that skin and those bones. Or maybe it's what is seeping out around the skin and bones.
Yeah.
So I still believe that there is a telepathic quality to a psychedelic experience, and that's humbling because secrets are the big disease. I still believe.
Well, to me, one of the benefits of entheogens, I like that term.
Thank you, yes.
Entheogens is it kind of takes you way beyond the ego to deeper levels of your own mind, and at those levels we're all connected.
Well, it's so interesting because I think about you and me meeting again, and with your wife Janelle, who I have to say is quite playful, and I love playful people.
Yeah.
But I think of you and I meeting again, and I think about our first session together, and I mean, that were fascinating in going deeper into what that other being is emanating. What have you found out? You want to ask me, but I want to ask you too.
Yeah.
And because the experiences have been quite, I mean, maybe I had the upbringing you had a normal upbringing.
Well,
which I don't think exists.
There's probably no such thing
right.
as normal. But I would say one of the lessons that I have learned is patience.
I was just talking with Janelle about that.
It was Martin Luther King who said the arc of justice, the arc of justice bends, but it bends very slowly. And I think when I was in the 1970s as an eager graduate student, aware of all the good research in parapsychology, I said to myself, there's no reason there shouldn't be a revolution right now based on what we know. But of course, that's fine for me, but not for everybody else. Everyone has to come to these realizations in their own way and at their own time. And on a planet like this, with billions of people struggling each in their own way to survive, to make a living, to care for their children, change rarely happens that fast, and when it does happen fast, it sometimes, in fact, often gets reversed. An example of such a reversal would be in ancient Egypt. The Pharaoh Akhenaten revolutionized the whole Egyptian religion from the worship of Atun to the worship of Amun-Ra, the one God, the first monotheist. But you know what? After he died, they reverted right back to the old gods and the old ways. So these changes, often a rapid change triggers a backlash. And I think that's what we're experiencing in today's politics. We had our first black president in the United States, and then wham, comes the backlash. But that's not the end of things by any means.
I think there are a lot of people who have awakened to interbeing. A lot of people who, since the 1970s, have awakened to kindness.
Yes.
When I said last time that compassion is a tool, somebody wrote back that was really stupid.
Compassion is not a tool.
Compassion is a beautiful tool for revolution. It's a tool for connection. It's a tool for knowing that without each other, we cannot function. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of people have awakened to that since. Yeah.
But another way I think that particular commenter was, to put the best face on it, was trying to say compassion is an end in itself. It doesn't need to be a means.
Totally. Yeah. No, I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
I just think that it's the easiest and most beautiful vehicle to go from one being to another. But to come back, I really believe that a lot of people have awakened to oneness, and not oneness in a vanilla pudding way that, so we're one and we can just sit there and look at our belly buttons.
Yeah. But that's what captured me, back in the 1960s. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin in 1969. I had my bachelor's degree. And you know what people were singing at that time? Popular music is, if you come to San Francisco, people there wear flowers in their hair. Well, you know what I did? I made a beeline. I was in San Francisco within 6 weeks of graduating from college, and I spent the next 30 years there.
And who has that made you?
It's made me who I am today. If anything, I am a Californian primarily. I mean, I've lived in Nevada, I've lived in Wisconsin, but I feel like a Californian. I feel in many ways like I'm still a flower child, and I'm proud of it.
Beautiful. I mean, because I join with you. What it made me is somebody who is interested in practicing kindness. It doesn't mean that I don't feel rage or violence or all these things, but I know that kindness And togetherness is a much, much, much more wonderful way to experience this lifetime.
I couldn't agree with you more.
So what are we going to do about it?
Well, we have found a common career of sorts, you might say. You're doing podcasts. I have started podcasts now since the last time I saw you. I'm converting these videos into audio files, and they're up on iTunes as a podcast as well. So people can download the audio of our conversation and listen to it at their leisure. Now I'm making that available.
And
I don't think I can do more than this. I'm sharing as many good conversations as possible with the world at large. Keep the conversation going.
I feel wonderful about it. I mean, it's the same thing. My partner, Jose Luis, and I, when we wake up and we think, well, the Western world is going to hell, we know that every week we interview somebody that has something positive and intelligent and kind to add to the conversation.
And you know what else I think is important to realize is that we think things are bad today politically. America seems so polarized. The Republicans and the Democrats can hardly talk to each other anymore. But back in the 1970s, we had the Vietnam War. We had incredible demonstrations on the streets. We had the saying, don't trust anybody over 30. Parents and children were at each other's throats.
And Nixon put 4 judges in the High Court. It's escaped me in the last 24 hours. The Supreme Court.
Yeah.
4.
Yeah.
4 Republican judges in the Supreme Court. So today we're a catastrophe because that one is going to put 2 Republican judges.
Yeah. So there's a sense in which, as bad as things are today, maybe they're actually better than they were in the 1970s.
I think they're better in the sense that there is all over the world, I'm absolutely sure, a common sense knowledge now that everything is connected.
Yeah.
That knowledge is extending to economics. I mean, some people don't like globalism and all of that stuff, but that knowledge is not just silly hippie knowledge.
No, it's now becoming well known in quantum physics. The interconnectedness of everything is called entanglement, and it's very well accepted now. And I was part of a circle of people in Berkeley in the 1970s who were pushing that point of view, and subsequently a book was written called How the Hippies Save Physics.
Oh, really? I didn't know about that.
Yes. And it has to do with this circle of people I was involved in back in those days. In fact, my book published in 1975, The Roots of Consciousness, was my first book, published just a little after I think I met you.
I do remember that.
Yeah. Was an important milestone in all of that. One can say that some of the seeds that were planted back in the 1970s have grown and have thrived in our culture.
Well, presently, I'm in possession of 16 hours of recorded material that Timothy Leary recorded when he was in prison.
Oh.
And these tapes have been lost for 40 years.
Oh.
And they came back to me by very, very...
Audio tapes. How interesting.
Extraordinary. And I'm just in the process of the reel-to-reel tapes, of listening to them. And his great topic is how he sees, first of all, how he sees the seeds of the 60s, and how he sees that those seeds will grow and they will take a very long time to grow. And I'm only 2.5 hours into these 16 hours, which I'm digitalizing.
Very good.
And it's absolutely fascinating. And I'm kind of waiting for life to tell me what I should do with
So
that
you
material.
are really deeply engaged right now in the process of looking at the lessons to be learned from that era.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And listening to how he thought as a philosopher, how he thought that all this material that was planted then, how it would grow.
Well, it was a very seminal time. Certainly in my life it was. There were ideas in the air at that time that seemed, from a psychology point of view, completely revolutionary.
Well, and the music, I mean, look at the music.
Yeah.
If you listen carefully to the words in some of the music that came out, most of the music that came out at that time, the words are very, very profound.
Yeah. I still enjoy listening to that music. I do.
But again, it's about that theme, I think, that we're connected and that we must seek that connection and that we must go beyond our shame and fear of our consciousness being projected on all the walls. We must go beyond that fear because that's the great exploration.
Yeah.
I mean, I really want to know how you see it.
Well, I can say this. One thing that has happened since that era is that we have seen a whole new wave of reality TV. And on reality TV, many times you see people letting down their hair and revealing the parts of themselves that you, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, you would never see on television. And I mean, a lot of it is nasty and wild, like the judge shows where people come in quarreling with each other and sometimes actually having fights with each other on television. But it's a way of showing parts of human nature that weren't fully exposed to the light of day. So I think we are engaged in a long-term process of making the unconscious conscious. And sometimes it's unpleasant. Lots of times we see aspects of ourselves that we don't want to see. But I think overall, it suggests to me that the human race, the human species as a whole, we are becoming more conscious of ourselves, which is a good thing.
I think that's a really, really, really good remark. And maybe the question that both of us can ask to the people who are listening, are you becoming more conscious of yourself? Is that useful for you? Is that useful for the world? And if we become conscious of ourselves, what can we create from that? What can we become?
Well, Joanna Harcourt-Smith, what a lovely note to end on and leave our viewers with those important questions. Thank you so much for coming once again to Albuquerque and being with me here in the studio.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's a great pleasure.
And thank you for being with us.